There are rapid changes coming to church in America as we know it. I was in Canada last week, and this was highlighted in a significant way for me, in a way that I had never put the pieces together until I saw what was going on in Canada, and then started thinking about what's going on here in America. So we're going to start with 10 challenges to the traditional model in America of church. We're going to then move to 10 benefits of house churches and why I think it's the most viable alternative of where things are going to head. And then we're going to discuss a summary of the main points. But I'm going to go ahead and just start with a big prediction, and that is that in 10 years, I think the majority of churches in America will be house churches. But let's go ahead and just jump into the 10 challenges that are going to undo the traditional church model as we know it. So the first thing is inflation and cost of living. All the prices have gone up. That just means things are more expensive. That means people have less money to give at church. That means they have less money to give for missions. The economics of the traditional church model is really being harmed. The traditional church paradigm where you need all this money to fund the programs, well, everything costs more now. The equipment costs more, the supplies cost more, everything costs more, and that's going to make the programs less effective, which they were already not very effective. It's going to speed up the decline of the traditional church model. The second thing is real estate prices. As these have skyrocketed, just think about trying to scale, trying to reproduce the traditional church model in an environment where prices have risen exponentially in the last 4 years since COVID started, where the real estate prices have basically doubled in a lot of places, and that cost to build has also gone up astronomically high. And so if you want to build a church, or even buy a closed church, it's going to cost an astronomical amount of money to get that in a location where you want to be able to put that. Imagine in areas where homes are $1 million plus. That affects being able to staff that church, because now the ministers need to be able to make $250,000 in order to start a church and maybe just get up to 20, 30, 40, 50 people, maybe 100 people. How are you going to sustain a $250,000 salary to be able to afford the cost of living in some of these areas when the budget's down, when inflation's so high? Just the economics, all this don't look good for the future of the traditional church model. It's just unraveling right in front of our eyes. Ministers were already not being paid a living wage in many places. They've got to do multiple things. The fourth is that there's not ministers being trained to fill these churches. And the ones who are being trained aren't probably good fits for most of these churches. They're looking for something a little bit more open-minded, and a lot of these churches are kind of stuck in the past and not open to new ideas or new things. They only want things the way it's been, and that's the death knell for a lot of churches. Keep things exactly the same as they've always been. Don't even negotiate on the negotiables. Their family gets put on the line. They've seen how churches treated the preachers of their past when they were growing up in church. They don't want that for their families. They want a livable wage. They want to make a difference. They're not finding that in church. People are literally finding a way of making a bigger kingdom difference in nonprofits where they have more freedom, flexibility, and better pay than they're getting in the traditional church in America. Number 5, it's just a poor fit for these ministers who've been trained theologically. They also have a lot of debt, so they have to make more money because of that debt, but then inflation's making that harder to fund it because budgets are down. It's a vicious economic cycle that we're seeing for these ministers and for the future of churches and church planting in a traditional style with brick and mortar real estate on the line, paid staff, multiple paid staff who need the kind of money that they need to pay their student loans, to have a livable wage, to raise a family. And all these churches want someone who has kids, they want someone who's married, but how are you going to pay a livable wage with inflation the way that it's been? So even the preachers who we have often have very short tenures, just a couple of years, and you got to go through it all again. You got to take 6 to 9 months to find the next person. You got to pay their moving expenses. You got to pay them a livable wage in the middle of high real estate prices, high inflation. It's just a recipe for disaster. Number 6, that we have a business model of laddering preachers up from the small church to the big church. But as smaller churches are closing, then that pipeline's going to close. Larger churches are not going to be able to pull from small churches like they were. Small churches are losing their preachers to the big church, and this like territorial competition business framework of like stealing preachers from the little churches to pipeline the big churches is going to go by the wayside. Number 7, lots of ministers are aging out and retiring. COVID brought on a ton of that. Just think about it for a minute, like where churches stopped. They said, we're all going to go online. And now you have the 60-year-old, 70-year-old preacher, and no knock on that. It's just technological challenges for many of them. And now they're having to do all this extra work that they're not used to in the middle of fearing for their life as they're a little bit older, in the middle of COVID and all that. It's like so stressful. I would say ministry has gotten a lot more stressful in the last 4 years than it was before the last 4 years, and it already was pretty stressful before that. Number 8, people are just less interested in going to church, and they're not going to church as much. So the church budgets are going to suffer, which means you don't have the economics to fund your programs or fund ministry or ministers, pay salaries. Like, all that's compromised because church attendance is down. People don't see it as relevant because it wasn't relevant to a lot of people. We just talked about the same old issues all the time. It's like we just basically just did ourselves in because we didn't have a growth mindset. We didn't have a discipleship mindset. We didn't train anyone to do anything. We relied on programs to keep people's attention because that's the world we live in. It's all about attention. And the church just doesn't do well playing that game. The church is going to lose the attention-seeking game every time. We're not equipped to compete in the marketplace for attention. You have to have something far deeper than that. And when we're not supplying something deeper than that, and we're trying to play the attention game, we're just going to see decline. Already kind of said it, but number 9, budgets are down, money's down, lower reserves, less ability to pay somebody. So churches are having to get creative. They're having to get ministers doing all kinds of more stuff than they were already doing. That leads to more preacher and minister burnout, which means their longevity is in question, which means higher churn and turnover. That also means that the programs are not going to be as good because you don't have the money to fund them. So less programs, which were the thing that churches were hanging attendance on, was being programmatic and attractional. And when you have less people to volunteer to pull that off and less funds because you have less people giving to pull that off, your programs are going to suffer, and that was the way you were winning people over to attend the church. Number 10, churches are just not making disciples. Haven't been for years. We could do like 100 videos on that one, but you get the idea. If you don't make disciples, your church is going to die. And along with that, bonus number 11 is we didn't reach our own kids. Over half of them left, didn't come back, may come back someday. But when we don't even reach our own kids, like, how do we let that carry on the way we let that carry on for decades? We were talking about that at Pepperdine in 2013. That was 11 years ago, and it hasn't gotten any better. It's probably just gotten actually quite worse. I think that that's a cluster of problems that is going to lead to the rapid deterioration of the traditional church model. It's already happening. Churches are selling, they're giving away their funds to Montessori schools and museums and all kinds of silly stuff. It's like, give your money to mission. But if you don't have a vision for mission, which is why you died, then you don't have a vision to liquidate your assets to give it to mission, because that was never in your wheelhouse to begin with. We have a tremendous opportunity in this real estate churn of closing churches to be able to take those funds and leverage them for kingdom work, but people just don't have the vision. When they're wrapping up and closing a church and they're mourning the loss, they're just like, just get rid of the thing and just, $15 million property in downtown, wherever, and they're just liquidating and getting rid of this to whoever wants to come get the money. And that's just really sad, really, really sad. So 10 reasons that I think house church are the most viable alternative. Number 1, you already own the real estate. You got the apartment, you got the house, you got the backyard. You go to a public place where people can find you, spot you, see you, connect with you. Hey, what are y'all doing? Having a Bible study, doing some praying. Hey, come join us. Can't do that in a church building with people walking by. You really can't even do that in a home. We often meet outside, and one of the churches that we've planted has met very publicly outside, and that's been wonderful to connect with people like that. The second thing is, in a house church, there's no need for trained preachers, so you don't need masters of divinities and theological training and student loans and debt to pay off and high salaries because of high cost of living. It's like, you're looking for people who already have jobs to fill the roles, train them to fill the roles. Again, this summer I'm going to be building out some training on that I'm going to be talking about here on the channel, and I hope you'll jump in on that and tell people about it when we get to the time for that. So number 3, it's a quick startup time. You don't have to raise zillions of dollars to buy the land and raise $100,000 and get an architect and then wait 3 years to build. It's like, you can start Sunday if you want to. There's nobody who's going to stop you from doing that. Number 4, it puts the church in the community where it needed to be the whole time, just like in the early church when churches met in homes, in cities where people could find them, and it was easier to invite them in that space. Because church is a third space. It's not your home and it's not work. It's a third thing. It's different. People don't know what to expect. People are less likely to go there if they're not familiar with it. But if you say, hey, come to my home, we're going to connect, we're going to talk about the Bible, it's like, I'll think about that. Maybe I've been to your home before. I have my home. I know what a home is like. Have a little bit more of an idea of what to expect, which makes people have more comfortability with it. Number 5, there's just less bureaucracy in a house. One of the most tiring things in ministry is all the bureaucracy of who's trying to please who and all the politics of it. Just throw that goodbye. You don't need all that in a house church. There's no sense in it. Can it still happen? Absolutely. But it's so much easier to avoid when you don't have to keep up the building. And what color is this going to be? And blah, blah. It's like, who's going to fix the this or that? It's like, you don't have all that stuff. It's your house. Number 6, the amount of resources to have amazing Bible teaching and worship in your home has astronomically, exponentially multiplied in the last 10 years. So like 20 years ago, you would be like, well, there's not a lot of good resources for this. Like, who's going to teach? We don't have a gifted teacher. And there are ways to actually fix that, like using Discovery Bible Study for the sermon, like the lesson time. And look up Discovery Bible Study on this channel. You'll find out more about that. But the resources are there to be able to supplement the worship time and the lesson time. You get world-leading experts talking about discipleship and evangelism and all kinds of things, New Testament or Old Testament. So all those resources are there at your fingertips. A lot of it just totally free. Number 7, huge, it's intergenerational. We love this in our house church. Are the kids and the older people all intermingling, all teaching, all praying for each other, like all helping. Everyone is connected with everyone. Our 70-plus-year-old people are checking on our teenagers. It's lovely. It's wonderful. And our teens grow in their faith when they know that adults take interest in them because they're not siloed off in the youth ministry where nobody really even knows their name or what's going on. We all know each other's names, and we're all in tune with each other. So it's intergen, and that's huge for the sustaining of faith and the discipleship of our own kids. They're not getting lost in the crowd. Number 8, discipleship just happens far more naturally in a house church because you're interconnected. And with a smaller number of people, spiritual formation, deep conversation, spiritual intimacy is far greater in a house church with a small number of people, potentially, than in a room full of hundreds of people or, 75 plus kind of people. Number 9, house church, I think, is potentially more dependent on God than the big church. Now, this is subjective. It's not the same everywhere, but by and large, when you've got a big church with a, slush fund and emergency funds, all this, it's like really easy to not ask God for a lot of help. But in the house church, we're so in tune with each other's needs. Like, we're just praying for each other all the time. We pray tons on Sundays, asking God for help, asking God for direction. It's like moving to house church helped us to really rely on God and pray about so many more things than we ever used to do. And last, in house church, there's just a higher percentage of people using their gifts. So there's a lot less spectators. There's no back pew in a house church. We can all see each other. We're all involved. We're all encouraging each other. You may not be on the worship assignment list for the week, but if someone needs some prayer in the middle of that service, you're able to walk over and say, we need to pray for so-and-so, and we all gather around and pray for them. It's just organic. It's Holy Spirit led. There's a bonus item for you. It's Holy Spirit led, and it's lovely. So, a few points in summary, gonna wrap up. COVID absolutely, unequivocally expedited this process. It wore out the ministers and made people less likely to go into ministry. It led to increased government spending and inflation, which led to a higher cost of living, which led to higher real estate prices, which meant buying real estate and the traditional model is more and more out of the question. You get the whole picture. So getting the church building, staffing it, running the programs, all of that is getting so much more challenging than it ever was. And again, that was the bread and butter. The attractional church was the programmatic church. And when you strip those programs down and are unable to fund them and unable to fund the ministers to run the programs, then you are in a really difficult spot because you chose not to, by default, make discipleship the core of your church, but you pick programs instead. And now the whole economics of the programmatic system have been disrupted in a way that we have to. If traditional churches would say we're moving toward discipleship, come what may, and all that, you might be able to turn this thing around. But if your leadership's never had the vision for that, then chances are they're going to go into fortress mode, and it's just going to go down more and more and more. But this is just moving so much faster than I ever dreamed that it would move. And in some ways, I'm actually encouraged by that because I think that church is going to grow and be more impactful from the home than from that third space of a dedicated facility where all those funds are just going to waste, a lot of waste, in my opinion, in the traditional brick and mortar model. Now, none of this is a wholesale condemnation of the traditional church model in America. There's some exceptional churches doing exceptional work. God bless it. God uses it. It all belongs to Him. It doesn't belong to me. I'm not trying to criticize the bride. She's beautiful. But there's change coming, and it's happening, and it's all around us, and we got to recognize it, and we got to make the adjustments, and this is what I see happening. So I think in 10 years, there's going to be more house churches than traditional churches in America. It's going to be very hard to measure that because you're not going to know that most of them exist. But when we look at the numbers of all these people are leaving church, it's like, where are they going? A lot of them are going to homes. So maybe we have less to stress about. Maybe God is preserving for himself a people in a way that the demographics and like the census and stuff and the statistics are not going to bear out, because these churches are going to run under the radar where no one's counting. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I would love to hear your thoughts on the challenges. I would love to hear your thoughts on the benefit of house church. And I would love to hear your prediction of where you see church in 10 years in America, where you see the future of the traditional model and the house church model within 10 years in America. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will dialogue with you if you comment. Hit that like button. But the most important thing is, I'm putting up another video on the screen of why people are leaving traditional church for house churches. That video took off, got 67,000 views in a matter of a month or so. And so I hope that you'll check this out. Very important to consider what God is doing in the world so that we can be on board with his mission. Talk to you soon.